Welcome. Nice to see all of you again here. It's very nice weather out there, and we just start with our program. There are going to be a lot of things happening today, and we are going to also have a great exchange in the afternoon. And I will introduce into what is going to happen today. And afterwards, we have a keynote speech by Ylann Schemm, Director, Elsevier Foundation, one of our great partners, strategic partners, that help us to build this program. So about the program Female Science Talents. We are actually a very new format of Falling Walls Foundation, and we were born during the COVID pandemics, 2020. And then 2021, we realized we need to start something where we promote exceptional talents. And then we started the intensive track program. And here you see the first cohort of intensive track 2022 sitting. And we are really happy that we brought them together. We kicked it off in January 2022, and then we first met in May 2022, also here in Spielfeld, with the kind support of Roland Berger. And now we have our second in-person conference getting together. And we are especially happy that we also have Zia, the visible Women in Science, present here, which is now was started by Zeitverlag, the German newspaper. And they also have a very similar idea, but they are focusing on Germany. And I think it's a great mode of cooperation for all of us to bring those international talents, which is intensive track of Falling Walls Foundation, with these talents from Germany, and have this exchange. So this is the focus of today, have this exchange. And the program is that we will going to have, after the great keynote speech of Ylann, afterwards we have two great panels with wonderful speakers, and with a coffee break, of course, in the middle, so that you can have some rest. And after the lunch, we will have our workshops. And in the evening, we have some program too. I don't want to talk too much. I'll just give the word to Ylann. Please meet Ylann Schemm, Director, Elsevier Foundation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's such an honor, really a huge honor to kick off today together with Zarifa, and such a pleasure to see many familiar faces and new ones as well. I see a beer there. And I had the pleasure of joining you in spring for your first gathering, so I'm very keen in the coming days to hear how your journeys have gone and the workshops and so forth. So what Zarifa asked me to do was to share a bit about the inclusive leadership, inclusive research and leadership that we've experienced at Elsevier and the Elsevier Foundation. So my goal is today, because I shared some of this in a conversation with Ruth Morgan, Professor Ruth Morgan last time, was to give you a little bit more, go into the data and some of the ways we do this, to, in Dutch you say to lift up the veil, but to give you a glimpse into kind of the operational aspect of this, because that is where well, as the Americans say, where the rubber hits the road. That's where it really happens. If you don't have, systems in place, it's not going to happen if you don't have partnerships in place. So let me get started, and I would just like to say it's an honor to also be a partner with other partners. So Roland Berger, the DFG, the Bayer Foundation, and to support this wonderful work that Zarifa and the team have set up here at Falling Walls, because really, we want to do this together. We want to be really in the thick of it with other partners, helping to build a stronger research ecosystem. So without further ado, I'm, as Zarifa said, Ylann Schemm. I'm the director of the Elsevier Foundation. My colleague Domitiana Francescon is here with me. So please do take a moment, learn more about us if I don't get to talk to you. But I also have a hat within Elsevier, which has proven very, very handy for getting things done. And that's as a vice president of corporate responsibility at Elsevier. And so what I've been able to do is take a lot of the learnings from the foundation and bring them into the company and help them accelerate things. And I've learned a lot and been able to pull a lot of resources from Elsevier into the foundation: content, data, analytics, experts, you name it. So let me just get started. I'd like to start with this because I think it begins and ends with inspirational leadership. So you can have a lot of strong grassroots activities in an organization trying to move the needle forward, but if you don't have that top, that support at the top, it's really hard to make progress. And so for many years, we did the best we could, many of us working to drive gender equity at Elsevier, but it really wasn't until Kumsal Bayazit, our CEO, came in 4 years ago, that we started to see the resources be put in place to support all of the grand plans. And I'm going to show you a one-stop shop, an overview of what we're all trying to achieve to give you a better sense, because this must sound vague to you. So just for those who may not know Elsevier, it's a publishing company, scientific, technical, medical, but it's also an information analytics provider. And it really, especially in the past years, sees itself as a partner to the research community and to health professionals, and to really try and make some of these advances towards the SDGs. So that's also a whole change in how an organization thinks. The fact that the society, the SDGs, that's really in there. And I myself, I'm just very happy about it, because it means you can do so much more. Those of us working in areas like inclusive research, gender equity, we can do so much more because the organization stands behind it. So not to overstate everything, but I'd like to start also by setting the scene. So tomorrow's a big day for some of us. Tomorrow a big report will be launched called Confidence in Research, and it's an economist impact report, and it's the culmination of a year of work looking at what effect has the pandemic had on the research community. And they've surveyed something like 3,000 researchers from 100 countries, but there's also been a massive dialogue with many, many different stakeholders, partners such as Sense About Science. We have Tracy Brown, the director of Sense About Science here, has been the strategic partner in this initiative. But also, for instance, the Kerber Foundation has been a key partner in the dialogue. Research America, I could name a couple of others, but the whole idea was trying to get to the root of what have the effects of the pandemic been in accelerating science the way it has done. So we've seen a lot of good come out of it, but we've also seen scientists become completely inundated with, the need to defend their science, to speak to the media, so public scrutiny, misinformation in the media. Many of you will have dealt with that. I was just speaking with Jane and Lerato and Mariana. Many of them called to speak with policymakers about their research and to combat misinformation. So it's been a really stressful time for scientists. And anyway, I'm not going to steal any of the thunder of Tracy and colleagues. There's a round table tomorrow at 11 o'clock. So please do hope you come. And also, we'll be very excited to hear from at the Elsevier Falling Walls dinner tomorrow night. We'll learn a bit more about it. And Mariana, where are you, Mariana? Dr. Mariana Moretti, am I pronouncing that right? We'll share a kind of more of a gender lens and perhaps also an African lens on the findings. And I think one of the big findings that I will share is that researchers really saw, especially researchers from low and middle income countries, women researchers, early career researchers such as yourself, saw a real widening of inequities, gaps in resources, in access, in funding. And this is really why it's so critical that we keep up, we more than ever keep up the momentum to fight for a more inclusive research ecosystem. And so just to say that, for Elsevier, working with data and analytics is not new. In fact, it was 7 years ago in 2015 at the Gender Summit in Berlin that we launched our first gender report, and what this did was to create a new methodology for sex disaggregated data from Scopus, our abstract and indexing service, to really look at how are women and men performing in terms of research outputs, citations, collaborations. And this was a consultation, and I think that's key, that you're consulting with the research community to improve the methodology. And so the most recent report was 2020. And what this pointed up was just, you're seeing greater and greater participation by women in research, but you're still seeing not the same levels in terms of citations, output, and there are many, many reasons for this. And of course, the pandemic has been also a big factor. I did want to say that we're gearing up for another one in 2024. It takes time, but it will have much more intersectionality. So there will be age, there'll be career stage, there will be SDGs, and there'll be many more kind of factors, because for instance, this most recent one looked at 26 different research areas, 16 different countries, which includes the European Union, but it was really more on gender. But the next one will have much more to slice and dice and explore. And the goal is always to equip decision makers with the tools they need to plan intervention. So what kind of funding, what kind of new programs do we need, like the Falling Walls Female Leadership Development, for instance. And one of the outputs of the gender report was that Kumsal, our CEO, set up this advisory board. And there are many amazing, 10 different experts. You'll recognize those who were at the spring gathering. Elizabeth Politzer in the middle. She's the architect of the Gender Summits. Martina Schraudner from Fraunhofer University next to her. Really amazing people from all over the world who have helped. What it does is it brings accountability, is that we can plan many things, but here you have these experts and they've really guided us. And if you're interested in learning more about how we've tried to move the needle in areas like improving the representation of women, so that's basically editorial boards, conferences. I'll share a little bit in a minute. Career progression, our support of this program is also part of that, but also sex and gender and research. We've just put together sort of a 2 years on report card, if you will. How have we moved the needle? So I think what's always important about having an advisory group like this is if they help to provide accountability, transparency, visibility, things like that. And one of the first things that Elizabeth Politzer did when she joined the board was to say, hey, listen, we don't know what's happening around sex and gender integration in SDG research. Can you do a study with your analytics? And so this was the first study from 2020. It was in our Power of Data to Advance the SDGs report, and it's recently been refreshed, but the point is that beyond the usual suspects of SDG 5, gender equality or health, you see very little integration of sex and gender dimensions in research. And if we're going to move the needle on the SDGs, we cannot ignore this. You cannot just bundle it in to one or two SDGs. You cannot combat climate change or poverty if you don't take women into consideration, because as we know, as we've seen, they are adversely affected, and it's just essential. Anyway, so this kind of thing comes out of having advisors at that level. Now, this is overwhelming. You don't need to read it. The point is that every month, I'm the co-chair of Elsevier's Gender Equity Task Force. We sit down and we look at how are we moving the needle on 6 different areas. Now, the first 2 are internal, so it's about senior management. How are you going to boost the numbers of women in senior management? And so there are all kinds of projects in place. The UK gender pay gap, because it's a good metric also for other countries. It helps you think through the gap and your pipeline planning. But also things like having talent programs, so you're filling that pipeline, so you're ready down, a couple of years down the road, you've got people coming in, creating a more inclusive culture. Then the next 3 are external, so the goals I mentioned with the I&D advisory board, career progression, sex and gender and research. So it's a lot about what can Elsevier do as a curator of research to create that more inclusive system. So it's everything from, editorial boards, awareness raising, so training for editors, training for researchers, embedding sex and gender considerations in the peer review process, for when you're submitting a manuscript, Also working with funders so that you're working from the same, you're singing from the same song sheet. You've got the same, system in place. There's lots and lots of work to do. And then the last one is gender data. So I showed you those gender reports, but in the future, it's all going to be self-reported data. So it won't be through a methodology that's been developed, that you can, I won't go into it, but it uses social media methodology to figure out if it's a man or a woman in a certain culture. It will all be self-reported. So it's a huge shift for publishers, for funders, for all the different parts of the research system, a positive one. So just to show you quickly, it's a report card. This is what's happening within Elsevier. You have almost 52% women in the basic population, and it's 8,700 people. Then when you get up to the manager level, it's still pretty good. It's 45.6% managers. But when you start getting into senior leadership, you see a precipitous drop to 33%, and that's where all the pipeline planning is happening. Now, the good news is that Kumsal, since her, in her 4 years, she's managed to grow her leadership team to more than 60%. So I think we're seeing the repercussions of that in the organization, that it's just a lot more is possible. It seems to be a lot, it seems like a lot of promotions that never happened are starting to happen. So it's good news. And then I just wanted to share, one of the things that has really been a big focus is creating a culture of flexibility. And, sometimes I think, gosh, so for instance, with the pandemic, not having a rules-based system, you have to come into the office, you have to, it's all principles-based. It's about the work you do, and then you agree with your team, et cetera, what makes most sense when you come in, how do you go about your business? And you see that people are much happier, and I do think sometimes, gosh, if I'd had that when my children were young, I would have been a lot less stressed. Anyway, so it feels like a much healthier culture. And comparably, I've just shared that, some benchmarking about what do colleagues think. And these things they're important. They're just important because they're stimulating to continue the journey. And I want to just note that we really take that systems approach, which I mentioned about partnering, why it's so important to be in a consortium of partners working together on things. The research ecosystem is so complex. There are so many different actors and players. We can be off tinkering in our corner. As one publisher, it doesn't mean that much. We have to work with our sectors. We have to work with the larger organizations. So the Royal Society of Chemistry set up the Joint Commitment for Action on I&D and Publishing. And it's really been so important. The idea is non-competitive space where you really do move things forward. So things like, for instance, gender, race, and ethnicity self-reporting. How can you develop a system that will work across all different geographies so that you can really measure what's happening in a way that is fair and transparent, et cetera? And so there are the 54 publishers. That's really probably, almost all the publishers that people are publishing in, publishing companies, they have signed up to this and are working together on things like what's best practice for editorial boards, et cetera. And I think one of the areas that needs a lot of work is this whole idea of embedding sex and gender in research with funders, to make sure that funders and publishers are on the same line going forward. So there's lots of work to do, but I also wanted to credit the gender summits. I know that the program just had a wonderful panel at the gender summits, and I credit them with being this place where you have this virtuous learning cycle. It's eureka moments. You go and you think, oh my God, we need to do something in this area. We can make a difference. And then you go back and you share, and then it's a constant learning and sharing. And so I think those kinds of places, like Falling Walls tomorrow, are so, and here today, and over the next couple of days, are just incredibly important. So I mentioned the gender, race, and ethnicity work. Just to mention, if you're interested in learning more, there was a couple of months ago a very nice Nature article about this. My colleague Holly Falk-Krasinski really spearheaded this, working with external experts. How do you develop a system that everybody can adhere to? And Elsevier's embedded it in their editorial management system. So talking about conferences, I think this is so important. And the good thing is that there's so much more awareness today than there was 10 years ago about this, where you'd go to conferences and there would be manels, and now it just doesn't happen. Not to the same degree, and if it does, then they're shamed. So Elsevier has about 60 conferences a year, scientific conferences, and I just wanted to show you, this is one area we're working on, and the head of conferences is married to a scientist, a woman scientist, and he's just been so, immediately picked this up and basically started an engagement-driven model. The idea was not to set up targets initially, but really to just talk to the chairs, who are usually editors of journals, conference chairs, drive awareness, show what's happening in the field, pull together, do the research, so using, being able to show these are the leaders in the field. And so through this model, you saw the numbers going up, 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 from 15% invited speakers to about 40% today. It dropped slightly because we've moved to self-reporting, and then you have different, you can, there's more than just man and woman, there's also gender diverse and prefer not to disclose. But this is positive, but it requires vigilance, right? We need to stay on the ball. This is an overview of women on editorial boards. Now, just to remind you, Elsevier has 2,800 journals, so working on this will make a difference. Working on it with the joint commitment, and all the other publishers will also make a big difference, in what kind of research is published, what kind of leadership we see. So on the left, the Lancet journals, you see that 2 years ago, they were committed to reaching 50%. And for them, it's a little bit easier because they work with editors, call them advisors. And they basically wrote them all letters and said, isn't it time for you to retire? No, I'm serious, they did. They had a kind of sort of, we're really trying to achieve this. Can you help us achieve this? Would you suggest someone in your field, especially people who had been there for 20 years, and many of them stepped down, most of them who were asked stepped down and suggested someone. And so this is now, gosh, we're already 2 years into 50% here. So it's really great. Elsevier's own proprietary journals, it's gone from 16% to 29%. Still lots and lots of work to do, but there are plans in place, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And then there's also been a whole drive to work with the editors and the editorial boards to create a whole I&D pledge. So what is the target we want to set together? How are we going to get there? So what does this look like? Here's an example. Every single journal, their journal homepage, now has a gender diversity indicator. So this is psychiatry research, and they've gotten up to 36% women, and they've had 55% self-report. So we need them to report, and then we can. So this just shows you it's a work in progress, right? And there's lots of work to do, but you see their pledge. They're going to 50%. And what will happen next is on every journal homepage, you'll also see the benchmark for the field. What's happening in the field? How's the journal doing? Also the geographic spread. Because as they're doing this, there's also a renewed focus on what about editors from the Global South? What about career stage? Are you also involving editors earlier in their careers, so bringing people in so they can really learn the ropes or share their unique perspectives coming from a different generation, et cetera. And just a quick case study on one journal, Paleo. This focuses on paleogeography, climatology, you name it. And what this one editor did, Emily Wang, is she was able to boost the numbers in 1 year from 16 to 35% with three kind of tips that she shared. So this is a really good result. But really working closely with the editor-in-chief, making sure that everyone's on board, that they really see it, they see why it's necessary and important. Getting all of the editors involved in terms of, who should you choose, so the succession planning, and reminding them at these moments where you're going to rotate board members of the pledge, the goals. And then, if it's hard to find someone, then think about maybe splitting it up into 2 roles so that it becomes more doable. Because as we know, women researchers, and I'm sure you have this, many of you, that you're asked to do everything, be on all kinds of committees, and you get really overloaded and you need time to do your own research. So it's different strategies. So one of the big things that also came out of the 2020 Gender Report and the I&D Advisory Board was that we need to do more for early career researchers, especially women researchers. And so we launched a whole program in, it was actually April. And Falling Walls, a female leadership development program, was one of the 6th that we launched, and we received a sort of chunk of extra additional money from Elsevier, and we tried to create very, very targeted partnerships. So really in the UK, maybe it's not so much about the attrition of women scientists. There is that issue, but it's more about Black researchers and what can we do to move the needle there. So it was both not just women researchers, but also underrepresented groups. We tried to be very, very localized. And my colleague Holly and I wrote a Times Higher Education kind of an editorial on it, like an op-ed, what the journey was like. And it was just exciting to have that kind of support. Like, yes, of course you should invest in career progression. And so it's really wonderful to have that funding and these new partnerships. And I realized, in shifting to the foundation, that you may not know much about it, but it's not huge. It's a small team, so Domitiana and I are half the team. And then we have 1.5 million a year. I wish it was more. I'm always lobbying for more. But what it allows us to do is to be very, very targeted, very, very niche, so that we can do proof of concept and then help partners get serious funding, So that's a nice kind of, I see it as a sort of accelerator role. We focus on 4 SDG areas, which Elsevier does too, which allows us to tap into, climate and health and gender and reduced inequalities. But we can then reach in and get all of those, wonderful resources to boost what we're able to do. So that's kind of a key thing. I'm not allowed to say that we double, Domitiana won't let me say we double the impact. That we have, the one thing is the funding, the other thing is the resources, but we are able to really boost what we can do for partners because of this. And then just very quickly, example of one of the partnerships that we launched, the Asian Scientists, very similar in a way to Falling Walls because they have an amazing platform like you do, Zarifa, in order to, where you can really talk about your talents. This was a 2-day leadership conference in Singapore, and we, pioneered it in COVID. Very difficult. You can see everybody's masked up. It's all quite controlled, what you could do, how you could speak to people. But in Singapore, they had a very strong focus on the commercialization of research. It was very much about your brand, about pitching yourself to media, along with all the other skills you need to know as a researcher. So it might be interesting to just kind of compare and contrast at some point, Zarifa. And then another example of one of the partnerships was in Japan. We are developing a whole series of interviews. They're like oral histories. It's basically role modeling. 10 principal investigators in Japan. Many of you probably have seen the numbers. Japan is one of the lowest. Some of you may have studied there. Have very low numbers of women scientists in leadership positions. So this is about working with RIKEN, the largest Japanese research institute, really helping them kind of showcase the ways these women have created pathways to leadership, and they run their labs, et cetera. And then, of course, I will end with Falling Walls. One of the new partnerships we're so very, very proud to be a part of, and excited to see where we can take this. We had a pilot this year, and we were really delighted when Zarifa came and presented to our board, our foundation board, and they were very happy to continue funding for the next 2 years and to support the Breakthrough Award that you're setting up. I think you can have a big dinner at some point. So anyway, we're happy to be a part of this, happy to be there with our other partners. And really, that's what I wanted to share with you today. Just to thank you.